Namaste, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Pranav Patel, and I'll be your host for tonight's webinar. Just to recap, tonight's event is brought to you by Hindu Yuva, the largest Hindu organization on campuses across North America, with over 100 university chapters and 35 high school chapters nationwide. Hindu Yuva, which stands for Youth for Unity, Virtues, and Action, is built around the four P's: practice, promote, preserve, and protect, helping young Hindus deepen their understanding of Dharma and carry it forward with confidence in their everyday lives. Through things like regular meetings, community events, and seva, or selfless service, Hindu Yuva chapters give back to the communities they're a part of while building a strong sense of purpose and belonging amongst their members. Tonight marks the fourth and final installment of our webinar series called Dharma in America, held in honor of America's 250th anniversary. Over the course of the summer, we've explored four dimensions of Dharma: personal, family, community, and national, through conversations with well-known public figures about how they've navigated their own Dharma while building their lives here in America. I want to note that we will be taking questions during the webinar to ask at the end, so please ask any questions you may have throughout the chat, either on YouTube or Facebook Live. Now, tonight's session explores community Dharma, which is the responsibility and role we hold in shaping and nurturing the communities we belong to. As Hindu Americans, we navigate the delicate balance of staying true to our cultural roots while engaging in the broader, diverse fabric of American society. We'll reflect on how to show up for our communities in ways that go beyond surface level interactions and how collaboration across different communities can be rooted in a deep sense of identity. We'll explore how we can move from simply networking to creating genuine, impactful connections and the responsibility we have to those around us in fostering a collective well-being. Our goal tonight is to offer insight into how Hindu Americans can build stronger and more connected communities that support and uplift one another. And we have an incredible guest to help us do just that. Joining us tonight is Eddie Stern. Eddie G is a renowned yoga instructor, author, and researcher based in New York City, and the founder of the Broome Street Ganesha Temple and Broome Street Yoga. He has been practicing yoga since the late 1980s and studied for nearly 2 decades under his teacher, Sri K. Pattabhi Jois, in Mysore, Bharat, later co-writing the book Guruji about his teacher's life and work. Eddie G is also the author of the best-selling book One Simple Thing, a new look at the science of yoga and how it can transform your life. And he co-created the breathing app to help make simple, effective wellness practices accessible to people from all walks of life. He was also a founding board member of Bent on Learning, which pioneered bringing yoga and meditation into New York City public schools, reaching thousands of children. We're very, very excited to hear your story tonight. And guiding tonight's conversation is our moderator, Richa Bhome. Richa is originally from Atlanta, Georgia. She's earned her Bachelor of Science in Industrial and Systems Engineering from Georgia Tech, where she was a part of the Hindu Yuva chapter for 3 years. She currently works as a software engineer and serves as the Vibhag Saha Bodhik Pramukh in Austin, Texas. Now, with that, I'll hand it off to Richa to get us started.
Thank you, Pranav, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here with us tonight. Eddie G, Namaste. It is such an honor to have you with us. I've really been looking forward to this conversation because I think that community is something that all of us are searching for in different ways. We live in a time where we're more connected than ever, but many people feel increasingly isolated. And so tonight, I'd love to explore what Hindu philosophy has to teach us about building meaningful lives and meaningful communities. And I'd actually love to start at the very beginning. As a teenager, you were playing in rock bands, and then instead of following what most would consider a conventional path, you decided to travel to India. Looking back, what do you think you were searching for?
Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me. It's really an honor to be here with your group. I know you guys are doing amazing work around the country. And I love the name of your group as well. It really speaks to the principles that you wish to uphold. When I was a teenager, I was looking for similar things in my life. I had an English teacher who had taught us that the three most important questions we need to ask ourselves were, who am I, what am I doing here, and what do I do next? Not where will I go to college? What am I going to do for a living? And, how much money can I earn? And those questions really spoke to me because I wasn't interested in going to college or anything like that. And I didn't see a lot of meaning in the life path that I saw everyone around me worrying about, which was getting into a university and then graduating and getting a job and then doing that for the rest of your life until you retire. And I thought, well, for what? And so from the questions that she said we needed to ask ourselves and the questions I did ask myself, that led me to really engaging in a life that was reflective and contemplative. And that eventually led me to yoga, and then, which I started doing when I was about 18 out of high school. And then I decided, of course, not to go to university. And by the time I was 20, I knew that yoga was what I was going to dedicate my life to. And I felt that that was really the thing that was calling me. And so I did. And so now it's a whole bunch of years later, and I'm still doing the same thing that I felt I wanted to dedicate myself to. And I love it as much now as I did when I was, 18 or 19.
I think that idea of searching for something that you're passionate about is something that a lot of young people can relate to, even if we don't necessarily know what we're looking at or looking for just yet. And your journey is particularly interesting because you weren't necessarily raised in all of these traditions. You came to understand them over time. And many young Hindus inherit these traditions from their families, but maybe don't always understand the why behind them. So my next question is, was there a moment when these practices stopped feeling like something that you did and started becoming something that you truly believed in?
Well, I only started doing these things because they were meaningful. And no one told me that I had to do yoga, and no one told me that I needed to do puja or chant mantras or anything. I did them because I was drawn to them. So they had an invisible meaning for me from the beginning. And that meaning wasn't something that was, some cognitive understanding of the meaning behind the rituals or symbolism or anything like that. But I was drawn to it. And I think that I was drawn to it because, if you follow along with yoga and Hindu tradition, because of samskaras, and that if you have the samskaras for these things, then you'll do them. And if you don't have the samskara, then you won't do them. So somewhere in me, there was a pull back to these things, which I must have experienced perhaps in earlier births or something like that. So I continue even now to explore meaning and purpose behind the different things that I do. But I've always believed in them from day one when I first heard mantras being chanted, and the first time I went into a Hindu temple in India. There was something in me that felt on a deep level, wow, there's something invisible here which is pulling me in, and I want to be around this. So, and that kind of belief and faith in something wasn't something that anybody told me I needed to have or that I should have. It just came out from me. So in that regard, maybe I'm lucky because I don't have to navigate being told to do something, and because I've been told to do something, I resist and then move away from it, only to try to come back to it later in life, having been separated from it for a long time, which happens in all religious traditions, in many spiritual traditions as well. This is a common thing where parents want to ensure that their kids have the same beliefs and follow the same things that they do for continuity, for whatever reason. And this isn't limited to Hinduism. It's all across the board. So that's all.
Yeah, I really like the distinction between just being exposed to a tradition versus that internal pull that you get. And I guess yoga is one of the clearest examples of something that can look very different once you understand what's really underneath it. In today's world, yoga is often just associated with fitness, but you've spent years pulling the tradition back to its actual depth, even partnering with institutions to study it. How has your understanding of yoga maybe evolved, and what do you think people miss when they only see it as a physical exercise?
Well, I really like science, and I went to Vivekananda Yoga University I think when I turned 52 and did a master's degree. That was my first time going to university. And so I love science, and I spend a lot of time reading science papers and writing about science. But understanding science and doing research on yoga has done literally nothing to enhance or improve my understanding of yoga. It's just ways of having a new language to explain how yoga works to people who maybe would like to understand how it works. They're interesting things, and it's cool stuff to know, and mechanisms are really fascinating. But the meaning that you get from yoga practice is from engaging with it and from developing this ability to sense how you're feeling and how you're perceiving and what your sense organs are and how we gather information and how we create narratives about ourselves and tell stories and how we can sense consciousness within us. These are all the things that we don't need science, and probably science can't really reach those kinds of levels. Because it's an ineffable thing that doesn't need to be measured and can't be measured. But there are things in the world that can be measured, and so it's interesting to measure those things. People in the world, we like measuring things, and we need measurements for stuff, to make recipes, to cook things, to build airplanes, to make clothes, to build an apartment building or an air conditioner or whatever it might be. We need measurements. They're useful, and math is fascinating. But all these things are in the world of nature and changing nature, and so it's fun to engage in the world of changing nature and learn a lot of stuff. But consciousness is not affected by nature, and it doesn't change. It just observes all of these things. And consciousness, at least according to Patanjali and to other rishis, can't be measured. It can't be quantified. And there's no amount of science which is going to be able to touch upon what consciousness is. So it's important to understand that through yoga, concentration, meditation, mantra, service, all of these things, we're touching the immeasurable. And that's the thing that gives a special kind of joy or fulfillment to your life. And then the things which are measurable, those are all the things for communication and for conversation and for bringing things to people that might help them.
That's so interesting. And I think that for especially young people in America whose first and sometimes only exposure to yoga might be through the physical practice, that part of it where you said touching the immeasurable, that they might be missing. But when you go back to the Yoga Sutras, there's this entire even ethical framework that comes before we even get to asanas, right? In the Yoga Sutras, the very first limbs of yoga are the yamas and niyamas, the ethical principles and personal disciplines that guide how we relate to others and to ourselves. So maybe for those who might not be familiar with them, could you briefly explain the yamas and niyamas and which of these principles are especially relevant for young people navigating modern life?
Sure. There are basically two pathways in Yoga Sutra. One of them is a direct method of realization, and the other is indirect. The direct method is called Abhyasa and Vairagya. Abhyasa means the effort of presence. You can do that at any time. You don't need a yoga mat or a fixed time or place. You can be doing it any time of the day. And then Vairagya is a non-identification with anything that you've ever seen or heard. And we identify with all the things that we see and hear. That's how we form our personalities and our identity and craft our learning and all these things. So if you can let go of identity with anything that you've seen and heard, and then later all identity with anything of the changing nature called the gunas, then the only thing left to identify with is consciousness. And this is the direct path. If you can't do that, which most people can't, then you need to take steps. And the steps are called the angas, or the limbs of yoga. And the first of the 8 is called yama, and there are 5 of them. There's ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, and aparigraha. And ahimsa means non-harm, asteya means honesty, and satya means, ahimsa, non-harm, satya is honesty, asteya is non-stealing, and then brahmacharya is not sexually objectifying people or things, and or practicing celibacy, or it also refers to a stage of life where you're a student. It can be any of those things. It can also mean completely only reaching towards Brahman, and not reaching towards anything else, only reaching towards the absolute. And the last one is aparigraha, which is not being greedy. So if you basically do these things in your life or try to adhere to them, if you try to not harm people in word, thought, and deed as much as you can, if you try to be honest also without hurting people, if you try to not steal things, including other people's ideas, or words, property for sure. If you try to not sexually objectify people or do things harmful in the way of sexuality, and keep a mind perhaps focused towards knowing consciousness, and if you're not greedy, then you are going to be pretty calm inside of yourself. When you do the opposite of any of those types of things, then your mind is always going to be agitated. So sometimes you hear about these things being called ethical precepts, or the moral things that you follow in yoga. And while that is true, what Patanjali is primarily interested in is our minds, and that our minds are calm so that we can make them more and more and more and more and more calm, and that the acme or pinnacle of calmness is this thing called samadhi, which is total absorption in whatever your object of attention is. So much so that you, the meditator, feels like you seem to disappear, and you merge with that you're focusing on. And that samadhi has different steps as well. So when we look at everything in Yoga Sutra under the framework of concentration so that your mind can become calm, you can see that one of the reasons for practicing niyama is not just because they're good things to do, like don't harm people, that's an obvious one, but also when you have an idea of harm, you get angry, which is one of the reasons why you might cause harm, your mind is disturbed. But when you are practicing non-harm, what that also means is you're practicing making your mind calm and making it so that your inner condition is one of non-aggression. And when your inner condition is fully one of non-aggression, then you feel happy inside and you don't feel any enmity towards anybody around you, animals, people, the planet, and that people who come in your presence or animals that come in your presence feel this sense of calm within you, and they respond to it as well. And that if two people come in your presence who are angry with each other, they'll momentarily relinquish their hostility because they feel calm in your presence. And this is one of what is said to be the benefits of ahimsa. So, carrying on with all of the different yamas, you find the same basic type of a thing. But they're all different ways that we deal with people in the world around us. And the different ways that we deal with people in the world around us can be sources of either upset, mental agitation, or we can do them in such ways that we find mental peace. And Patanjali is interested in mental peace. So am I.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate how practical that was. It was a really good explanation of the teachings. And they're ancient principles, but the situations that we're applying them to, our work, our relationships, they're completely contemporary. And before we continue, just a quick reminder for everybody joining us, we're going to have time for audience Q&A after the conversation. So if anything that Eddie G says sparks a question, please feel free to drop it in the YouTube or Facebook Live chat as we go, and we'll come back to as many of those as we can. So going back to our conversation, one thing that I find interesting about so many of these principles isn't just about our relationship with ourselves, it's about how we exist in our relation with others. And that brings us to community. And you founded Broome Street Ganesha Mandir in the middle of Soho. Most people would not expect to find it in the heart of New York City. How did this temple come to be? And also, why did a temple specifically and not just a yoga school or studio feel important to you?
Well, I spent a lot of time traveling around India. And the first time that I went to India in 1988, I got there in December and I left in April of 89. I spent a month at an ashram in Kerala, and it was an intensive yoga program from 6 in the morning till 8 in the evening for a month. And then after that, I traveled from Kanyakumari all the way up to Kathmandu, and I did it by bus and by train, and it took about 3 months. And along the way, I stopped at every major temple that was on our route, and I made our route, basically with an Indian friend of mine, so we could go to many of the main pilgrimage sites. And we also went into all the smaller temples that we would pass by as well. And the temples that really stuck in my mind kind of the most were the small roadside or village temples that felt very community driven, or just had one pujari living nearby who was taking care of the gods. And I really liked that. I loved that there were so many like that in some cities that we were in. On every block, like in Udaipur, there'd be temples one after the other. Or passing through a village, you always knew that you could find one place to pray. And they were open air and accessible and beautiful and filled with colors and aesthetics, and you could feel the presence of the deities in many of them. And I was really moved by this, and I thought it'd be so nice to have something like this in New York, because there was nothing like that. We have churches and synagogues, but nothing that had the same flavor as what I was experiencing from Hinduism. And so that idea started germinating in me in 1989. And it kept growing, because I go to India every year, sometimes twice a year. And that idea just kept growing and growing. And then finally, in the year 2000, I had a yoga school from 1995, and we had built a small little Ganesha Mantapa where I did puja every morning. And then when we got this larger space, I wanted to do a proper pratishtha. So I asked permission from my teacher at the time, and we organized for some priests to come to New York. We had the Vigraha carved in Mysore, Anjaneya, Hanuman, and Abhayankara Ganapati Ganesha, and had them shipped over with all the brass and decorations and alankara that we needed. And then in September of 2001, we did the pratishtha and began operating a temple. And it's amazing to think that this is our 25th year. A lot has happened and a lot has grown. And the idea was basically to build a temple that felt like a village temple or a roadside temple that was community-led. When people came here, they would feel like they were at home and they were welcome, and that it was their place, and they could relax and pray and see the gods and then go about their day. So that was my vision, and that's what we've been trying to do these past few decades. I like it a whole lot.
What I find really interesting is the difference between creating a space and then creating something that people feel connected to and responsible for. A temple survives because the community commits something ongoing, festivals, seva, and then, like you said, it's community-led, and the daily care of the deity, the ritual calendar that repeats year after year. What did founding this temple teach you about building that community? And was there anything that you had to learn about sustaining that type of commitment by the community?
Well, the first thing that you learn is that you can't do these things alone. You need a team. And you need a team who believes in what's being done as much as you do. And then the second thing, and this comes along with the territory, is knowing that you're not doing this for yourself, but that the deity, Ganesha in this case, wants to be there. And if Ganesha didn't want to be there, then a pratishtha would not be possible. And so by doing a pratishtha, you are opening up a portal, sort of, for Ganesha's energy to flow through. And that's what the Vigraha does. It is a reflector of this divine principle. And then it's your job and the community's job to take care of that and to make sure that it can continue and it can increase so that people who come into the space can receive those blessings. So this is the main thing. Like, you can't do this unless the deity wants it to be done. And then it's your job to take care of it and attend to it. You play, for me personally, a very peripheral role in the entire thing, which is just, securing the space. But then we need the priest, and we need the volunteers, and we need the other workers, and we need the people who handle communication and admin. We need people to donate. We have our big donors and small donors, and all those things need to come together in one happy mix so that things flow. And it is not easy, but it's not, it's not a exhausting challenge, but, we have our challenges here in New York.
I did visit the Broome Street Ganesha Mandir earlier this year, and you do truly feel the energy and you feel that connection. It's a really beautiful space. I do want to broaden out this conversation a little bit. We live in the most digitally connected era in human history, but many feel increasingly isolated. Why do you think that genuine community has become so difficult to build?
Oh, I don't think a genuine community is difficult to build. You just need to let people know that you're there, and then they start to come. And if you're open to other people's ideas and you let them implement the things they want to do, community naturally builds. If you have to try to force it, then yeah, it's going to be hard. But I don't think community building is like super difficult. If you understand what community is people with diverse ideas coming together and sharing those ideas and having the energy and enthusiasm to implement them and take a leadership role in that implementation. Whether it's our Run Club or a Tamil Club or the Hindi classes or the dance performances that happen during the festivals. We have people suggesting all types of things, and if they align with the temple and those people can take a little bit of leadership for them, then they can happen. Our Tuesday night community-led Hanuman Chalisa is like our most popular night of the week. The temple is packed, and we don't have a priest there that night. Everyone just comes and they sing together, and the community does the arati. And it's an awesome evening. And this is fully, everyone just gathering together to do something beautiful and do something meaningful. So what's a lot harder than building community is getting donations. There's a tremendous amount of wealth in New York City. And honestly, we need more of that wealth to flow towards the temple. We struggle month to month with paying our rent. And, of course, we have a priest who we pay, and we have a cleaner we pay, and we have someone who manages the temple who we pay. And I'm strictly seva, and I have been for the past 25 years. I have a couple of jobs already, and so those are the things I do for my income. But yeah, we definitely need like this, a little bit somehow these the highway of money in New York City from the wealthy Hindu community needs to flow towards this temple. A lot of money goes to the Flushing Temple and to other temples around us, and they deserve it, of course, too. But we're the only operating Hindu temple in Manhattan, and I think a lot of us would like to see it remain here. So more difficult than community is fundraising.
That makes sense. And I actually really love the idea of if you show up authentically, then the community will come to you.
Yeah, because you need to give people in a community the space to be heard and to contribute ideas, and that's what community is. And so we have people who are doing our monthly new moon meditation and the Hinduism classes, and these are people who want to do these things and they volunteer to do them, and then they show up every week or every month to do them like they said they would. That's community. That's participating. That's engagement. It's not us telling people, oh, come here, do this, do the other, or try this. That's not community. That's just programming.
Right. So we've kind of going off of that, we've kind of touched on this a little bit. So you've spent decades forming communities, Broome Street Ganesha Mandir, Broome Street Yoga, and then even creating Yoga Sangraha and watching it spread worldwide, or partnering with institutions, writing best-selling books to help people. Looking back on all of these experiences, what qualities do you think make a community healthy and resilient?
Well, I've also spent time in really unhealthy communities, and I know that one of the things that make communities unhealthy is when there's too much top-down leadership, and that the leaders have a need for control or power, and they don't allow space for people to be as they are, where they have a very particular message that they might be tied to because it serves their need and desire to hold on to power. I've observed a lot of this and been in those situations. So what I'm trying to do now is build supportive, engaged community where I'm wary of the types of behaviors that I've seen become toxic in other places. And so, for example, with Yoga Sangraha, which is basically the approach to yoga that I've been developing over the past years, Sangraha, of course, is a word that means a collection or a compendium. And I've drawn different practices from different parts of India that I've explored and experimented with over the past 4 decades. And I put them together in somewhat of a unique way with some scientific principles behind them, which contribute to the calm feeling and the concentrated feeling you get from doing these sequences. But I don't think that I've created a system or a methodology. I think I've just pulled some different practices and, based on my knowledge and experience, put them together in such a way that they have a positive effect on people. And I think that's what yogis have been doing in India for a very long time. They've been reaching into this huge well of yoga that exists in India, and they've been pulling certain things out and putting them together in particular ways. One of the problems with our modern systems of yoga is this overarching need for branding and for holding on to your branding as your IP that you then become very protective of. And I understand why people do this, but it can lead towards rigid thinking, and it can lead towards a diversion away from some of the principles of why we do yoga in the first place. It's nice to give credit where credit is due, but it's also something to be a little bit wary of. So with Yoga Sangraha, even though I know that I've named it and I've made these sequences, and there are certain things that, ways of doing postures that I've come up with that are kind of healthier for your body type of ways of coming into them based on study I've done of physiotherapy and stuff like that. I still don't call it a system or a method. And the reason I don't do that is because I don't want to fall into that trap of branding or the trap of thinking that, yes, I've developed a system and this system is going to give you X, Y, or Z, and that if you're teaching the system, you can only teach it in this type of a way, otherwise blah, blah, blah. And the reason for that is I want to be allowed personally to grow and to expand and to improve upon things. And if I decide that things could be done a better way, then I want the freedom to do that and to change the approach so that it becomes better. And I know that that's going to happen over the next years. I've only really been teaching just these types of things for the past 3 years or so. Before that, I was still teaching some Ashtanga yoga and other stuff. But since I've been focusing only in on this, I keep seeing little by little how by doing these sequences and doing this kind of approach, that the yoga is teaching me things as well. And then as I learn new things, and I share them with my students. And I want that freedom and flexibility to be a part of what I do, and it's going to be a part of what my students do as well when they start to teach too. And they need that freedom. People also know that you can't just do anything and have it turn out okay. You can't try to make some pancakes and put some blueberries in there and then think, maybe if I throw some kimchi on top of the blueberries, you'll get some probiotics in there and it's going to be even better for you. And kimchi and blueberries might not taste very good together and you might get an upset stomach. So everything it's like not that anything goes. Certain things work in particular ways, but sometimes it's the format and the way that you do things that matter. So maybe if you're doing an inversion followed by a forward bend, there might be 4 or 5 or 20 different types of forward bends you could do, and then a couple of different inversions. But the important part is not the specificity of the exact asana, but the way and the order that you do things and how you approach them that's going to change how the signaling of the nervous system occurs. So there are all those types of principles that come into it. So long story short, I know this is a long answer, I apologize, but to finish my answer, I call Yoga Sangraha an approach to doing yoga. It's not a methodology. And some of my students recently have been pushing back with me saying, we think it's a methodology, and I say, well, you're free to think that, but I don't think that. I think it's just an approach, and the reason I think it's an approach is because the approach might change, and methodologies usually stay more or less the same. And let's just allow things to grow here. It's a growing phase right now. And I think that many of the things that you see in India could also be reframed or even thought of as approaches to consciousness rather than hard and fast rules of how you get there. There are hundreds and thousands of mantras and pujas and rituals and asanas and things that you can do to know who you truly are. And to know who you are means you need to approach yourself. It doesn't mean that you need to systematize yourself or that you need to become a methodology. It means you need to approach yourself. And to approach yourself means to seek yourself and to seek truth. And so that's why I use the words that I do. And I think it's much more in line with the Indic traditions of yoga than things like systems or methods. All right, that's the end of that answer.
No, I find that really interesting because it makes, these things and communities sound less like something that necessarily has structure and something that thrives with fluidity and space for growth. So we've talked a lot about what this looks like at the level of the individual and the community. Since this conversation is also part of our America 250 series, I'd love to zoom out even further and think about what these ideas might mean for the country around us. So this is my last question before we'll pivot to the audience questions. And my question is, What values from Hindu philosophy do you think would strengthen and benefit America today? And as America approaches its 250th anniversary, where do you see Hindu Americans fitting into the country's future moving forward?
Man, that's a really hard question. I'm of the feeling that America's in a really bad state right now. And I try to avoid politics when I'm in a public forum representing the temple. So I'm going to avoid them right now. But I think it's fair to say that we see a lot of division in the country right now. And there is a lack of listening that has been creeping into public discourse, and a lack of constructive communication. There's a lot of lying, and there is a lot of upset. I've never seen America so divided and off-kilter than I'm seeing it now. And I'm from here. I'm from New York City. I grew up here. I've seen New York go through a lot of things. But I'm seeing a really divided country. So I think that the principles, and of course many countries have these problems. It's not just America. But there is a decline of values that we see here, and a lot of it has to do with our leadership. There's a prayer which we finish all of the pujas off with, which is Swasti Prajabhyaha Paripalyantam Nyayena Margena Mahim Mahishaha Go Brahmanebhyaha Shubhamastu Nityam Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. And this is, may there be auspiciousness and goodness to all people, and may the leaders of the land lead us in the right direction, and may the wise ones have control of their sense organs, meaning may they be not swayed by all sorts of things, and may all the worlds be happy. I think this is a nice prayer to think about and to contemplate and even to say. And even if sometimes it feels like wishful thinking, it's also an intention setting type of a thing. This is what prayer often is. It's intention setting. That even though the reality might not be so, it'd be nice if it could be so. And so if you set the intention to move in that direction, maybe you can make small little shifts. So, 250 years. America is a very young country. We are in our infancy, especially in comparison to something like the Indic civilization, which has been around for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. You know, the mantras of the Vedas going back at least 5,000 years, if not more, a little less according to some people, but at least 4,000 minimum. This is a very long time. We don't have that kind of time privilege here. So we're still a developing country. We might be a first world country, and we might be leaders in some ways, but in other ways, we're still growing. And so give us time, we'll come around. But I definitely think that the contribution of all the different cultures that are coming into America have always been an important part of this country. And I think that there's a good chunk of America white America particularly, that has a hard time with this. And obviously there's a lot of racism in this country. There's a lot of anti-Semitism in this country. And so I don't have the answer to those types of things other than to acknowledge it and to recognize it. But one of the things that really makes America strong is all of the different people that come here from around the world, live here, and contribute to greatness and to development and to new ideas and to new technologies and new ways of living and thinking. This is, I think, the strength of America, and it's also the strength of New York. We have something like 800 different languages spoken in New York and 200 different religions that are being practiced or something like that. It's a huge number. And this is why New York is so cool. We are a net of diversity and of inclusivity. And that's what makes New York great. And I think that this is also something that helps to make America great too, because no one was from here originally. We all came here from somewhere else, and then generation after generation started being born here. But not too many of them, just a few. So, and people forget that.
Thank you. I think that's a perfect note to end our conversation on. I have a couple of questions coming in from the audience. The first one is, how has your relationship with your sadhana practice evolved over the years, and how has it shaped how your inner spiritual life translates into the way you show up for and serve the community?
Well, so one of the ways that the sadhanas that I do have evolved is that as you get older, you start to understand things in a different way. You become either more sophisticated or more subtle with the things that you're doing. And they just begin to take on different meanings because you've had an ongoing relationship with them for a long time. And that's all, really. I still study, I still learn, I still do new things. I have teachers that I study with in India, and I'm always learning something new. One of the things that happens is that when you're doing, say, particular asanas or pranayamas, but for me it's mainly with mantras or meditation, that as you repeat things, they bring you into states of either quiet or absorption or of joy. And as the joy or, say, concentration or absorption with those things happens with more frequency over time, that when you do those practices, I don't really like to call them practices, but when you do them, you can more quickly go into these quiet states. And it doesn't take as much work, or it doesn't take as much time, or it just becomes very normalized. And then your inner state starts to change a little bit so that you don't necessarily need the mantras or the asana to have that kind of a feeling, but that feeling is just in you because you've changed something inside of yourself. And so this is one of the purposes of doing any sadhana, is that you turn into the effect of what the sadhana does. And then that becomes your regular state or your natural state. And you don't have to do something to get into that state. You're transformed into it. You become that kind of a thing. And so this is my basic understanding of doing sadhana. And I feel over time that I have more of this sense of just a continuous inner calm that's in me. Even if I get agitated about something, I can still find this kind of reservoir of calm or something. I know that it's in there. And I think this is where all the different things I've been doing over the years have been leading. One thing I definitely know is that doing really fancy and complicated and difficult asanas were not helpful for sadhana. They weren't helpful for my sense of identity. They weren't good for my body. They didn't give me any new spiritual insights. All I did was get sidetracked by doing fancy things because my body could do them. But I didn't have real growth from that stuff. So, of course, there's a lesson to be learned from all of that. But for me, I can look back and say, wow, here were 15 or 20 years of my life where I got really diverted into thinking that by doing hard things, I would somehow, magically get some kind of a spiritual liberation or insight. And that didn't happen. All I did was get caught up in my body. So that's why I reverted to doing really simple things and quieter things. And over the past years, I've rediscovered yoga in my body, and I've rediscovered the joy that I had when I was 18, 19, 20, up until I was about 25. The joy of doing yoga practices simply for the sake of those practices, and not for any gain, not for any mastery or anything like that, just for this deep feeling of connection inside of me. So I've come a full circle over the past 40 years, and I feel that in these past 3 years particularly, my spiritual journey is reinvigorated, and I feel like I'm just getting started again. And I really like that, and I'm excited about it, because there's a relaxation that occurs from not having to be striving. So I'd say that's kind of, an answer to your question.
Thank you. The next question is, what do you think is the best way for seekers to learn? Sometimes the vastness of Sanatana Dharma is so daunting, I don't know where to even begin learning.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's really true. There's so much in Sanatana Dharma. I would pick one text or one teacher that you like and just start listening to them. If there's, say, a teacher you like on YouTube or something, you could just start listening to their lectures a little bit each day. Or maybe you could pick one text, maybe it's Bhagavad Gita or Yoga Sutra or an Upanishad or a Purana. If you wanted to challenge yourself, you could do something like read all the different volumes of the Bhagavad Purana and just start engaging with one thing. And then when you engage with one thing, it'll lead to something else. So, and remember, there's no limit to the amount of things that you can learn. But learning more things doesn't mean that you know more. It just means that you've learned a lot of stuff. The purpose behind the learning and the purpose behind the reading and the purpose behind the study is to know who you are. So all you really need to do is find something where you can say, okay, this is going to be enough for me right now. I'm going to engage with this text or with this teacher, and then it'll lead to something else. Maybe when I finish this text, I'll pick up another one. But start small and think about attainable goals. Not trying to memorize the entire Veda of the Rig Veda, but start small. Think about maybe learning a couple of verses from Bhagavad Gita by heart that you can meditate on. Do something small to engage with your tradition, and then see where it leads to. I know that it's hard to choose. I don't know if anyone has seen an app called Headspace, and there's another one called Calm and another one called Insight Timer. These are popular meditation apps. I don't use any of them. But when you go on them, you have like 10,000 different things that you can choose from. And they advertise like that also. Me, I go on one of those things and I'm overwhelmed by the choices, because they say, do you want to meditate to be calm or to deal with stress or to get energy or to be more focused or to deal with healing. And I'm like, I want all of those things, come on, let's go. And then there's so many, it's impossible to get started. So don't expose yourself to too many choices. See how you can just sort of funnel yourself in and pick one thing that you can finish and just begin engaging with that thing. Any book from, say, the Ramakrishna Mission would be a good book to read. Any book from Chinmaya Institute would be a good book to read. You start with one that's not too long, and then once you get through that one, then pick another, and then you can start getting some, suggestions from people. But that's where I would begin.
And then I have one last question. You studied under your teacher in Mysore for nearly 2 decades. What did that experience teach you about the relationship between teacher, student, and the wider community around a practice?
Well, I have to say that those years that I spent studying in Mysore were not positive years, and it wasn't a positive experience. And the community there was in denial about a lot of wrongdoings that were happening. And it was such a largely white Western scene who had very little understanding about the guru-shishya relationship that things got very twisted. So that is not where I learned most of the things that I know about Hinduism. I learned the things that I know about Hinduism from other teachers. In Mysore, I only learned asanas, and also saw a lot of toxicity. And it was a community that wasn't a very healing or positive community. There were nice people for sure within it, but it wasn't where this temple grew out from. It wasn't where all the things that I'm doing grew out from. It was just asanas, honestly, and a lot of forcing and a lot of striving and a lot of competition and a lot of things that were not super yogic. So, yes.
That was our last audience question. Eddie G, thank you so much for spending this time with us and being so generous with your experiences and your perspectives. I think you've given all of us a lot to reflect on, not only about yoga and Hindu philosophy, but about what it actually means to belong to a community and take responsibility for sustaining one. And with that, I'll pass it back to Pranav to close us out.
Thank you so much for your wonderful questions, and I really appreciate your time as well.
Once again, thank you so much, Richa and Eddie G, for such a rich and thoughtful conversation tonight. Hearing how you've built and nurtured a community, showing up in ways that go way beyond just surface level connection, it gives all of us a lot to sit with and to think about the communities we're all a part of. What really stands out to me, though, is how much value there is in just starting something, right? Whether it's a temple, a practice, or a small initiative in your own community, your story is a reminder that you don't need permission or a perfect plan to begin. You just have to show up and keep showing up. And so conversations like this one matter so much for the youth and for Hindus across America because they give us real examples of what it looks like to lead with purpose. And I hope that everyone watching tonight walks away with a little bit more confidence to go start something of their own. To close out, thank you to everyone who joined us live tonight. Thank you for being here. And this does close out our 4-part Dharma in America series. And it's been an incredible summer exploring personal, family, national, and now community Dharma together. We're so grateful to everyone who tuned in and hopped on to be a speaker for this incredible series. Just to make sure you guys stay tuned with Hindu Yuva on both Instagram and YouTube, as hosting more things, posting more things. There's a lot more to come. So again, on behalf of Hindu Yuva, thank you again to our speaker, our moderator, and all of you watching. Namaste, and thank you for being a part of this journey with us. We hope to see you all soon.